welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Anansi Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. Hey guys, and thank you for joining us today for another episode of Digital Agency Real Talk. I'm here with my best lady, Celene, to bring you some real down-home knowledge about what it's like to run an agency, where are the things that people tell you, and what's the real story behind it? What have we seen and experienced, and how can we help you be better at being a leader and doing the work that you love to do, and not the work that you have to do all the time. All right, welcome, Celene. What are we talking about today?
Today, we're talking about something that's super exciting and really comes into business all the time is core values.
Yes, core values. So this is something that I know when I say we, I mean I heard about years ago, and I was like, yeah, core values. But it took a really, really long time for me to understand in a practical way why core values are important and how you can actually use them. More importantly, how you can use them. Like culture, it's one of those things that's tossed around a lot and not necessarily always clearly defined. So let's start by talking about core values in a business itself. So what does core values even mean?
So basically, they're the values that your business pretty much like lives, breathes, and dies by. For example, like Anansi's core values, which I'll go through kind of briefly. We have our first one is symbiosis, which kind of how we define it. We talk about this a lot at quarterly planning. Is about caring for yourself and others. And the idea is that if you put yourself out there and you take care of other people, that they'll be there to take care of you as well. The second one is being self-aware and authentic. So being, very aware of your strengths and owning them, being aware of your flaws and owning them, and being real with other people about all these things. The third one is fulfilling work. Like, we're not just here to make money. We want to do something that we love, that makes us feel really passionate, that helps other people. The fourth one is simplify. Small changes for big results. So we try not to overcomplicate things. Sometimes that's hard. But even when we do, we go back and we simplify it, making things more efficient or automating things is an example of that. The next one is accountability. So this one almost ties in with being self-aware and authentic, but not quite. It's the idea that you take responsibility for your work, for your life, and not necessarily that you have to do everything yourself and be amazing at it, but that you take responsibility for these things. That includes reaching out and asking for help when you need it. And the very last one, which is probably like the most powerful one that's resonated with us a lot this year, is radical wellness. So let's face it, people who run businesses, entrepreneurs, can be workaholics, and the people that we tend to work with, our team, are also people who are really passionate and driven and work really, really, really hard. So it's important to have that, that same passion and effort you put into your work to your own self-care. So whether that be kind of like shorter work weeks, but with really intense work time, whether that be, setting, like for me, my self-care this past week has been going to bed super early. But just taking responsibility for keeping your physical and mental health, and making it a priority.
Yeah. So, some of you guys might identify with those core values or not, or some of you guys might be aware of your own core values or not. Maybe this is something that you've heard of but haven't defined, or maybe something you even haven't really heard of before. But what even is a value, right? Like a value is something that, if you unpack it, it's something that's really important to you. And it's something that helps you make and define your decisions. I would say it is a concept, or an idea that is really, really important to you that directs and defines your decisions. And one of the really, really important things that we've kind of learned over the years is that there can be a gap between what you state your values are and what your values are as they are demonstrated by your actions. And one of my first clients, Ken Keys from Consulting Resource Group, they have a really, really incredible product called the PSI. Anyway, I did a training course with him. And one of the things he spoke about is that ultimately your values are defined by your decisions. So they can help guide you towards different decisions. And they can help you identify who makes decisions in a similar or a different way. But if you, I think the example that he gave is that if you say, oh, I value my family and I value spending time with my family above all things, but you're consistently choosing to do other things that aren't spending time with your family. That is to say that, you're missing important concerts or events or sports games or things that your kids are having consistently because you're choosing to do, let's say, go to business meetings or go to volunteer and do things. I don't know, whatever it may be for you. The concept of should, I should do this or should do that is almost the antithesis of the value conversation. Because unless you're starting that sentence with, according to my values, I should do this. Whether or not you quote unquote have to do something, if you're choosing to do that and there's always a choice there, then you are valuing it over something else. So what does this mean in business? I don't know whether that makes sense to all of you guys. Let us know if it doesn't. But when we talk about symbiosis or being self-aware and authentic, I think self-aware is one of the values that we've had the strongest kind of practical use and awakening for, is that we have come to realize that we don't work well with people who are not self-aware. That is such an intrinsic part of me or of Celene or of some of the other people that we work with, that it becomes a wall when we're interacting with people who really aren't self-aware. And it becomes a wall that we often can't get over. I know I'm kind of monopolizing this a little bit though. Celene, what is a value to you? How would you define the word value?
How come I have to go after you all the time and you have all the good words and define it so well? But I think you said it really well. Like, it's something that resonates with your soul and with who you are. Some sort of characteristic. And actually, it's not an Anansi value necessarily, but personally, like, my value really is family first. And when you were talking about, should do this or should do that, in my mind, I'm thinking I couldn't even say should and do something else because it would break my soul to choose business over family for anything like that, like a concert or whatever it be. Just at the core of who I am, I actually could not make that decision, because it's one of my values.
Yeah, I think that's really important. But at the same time, I do want to acknowledge that because self-awareness is such a huge value for both of us, we are people who are automatically aware of our values. And, if we're getting into the real talk part of it, something that I've realized going out into the world is that is, if not a rare, then at least sometimes an uncommon thing. And that it's totally, totally okay to not be aware of your values in this moment right now. What I mean by that is that you will, I'm not saying that I'm going to live in ignorance and that's going to be wonderful. I definitely think that understanding, defining, and more importantly, questioning and redefining your personal as well as your business values over time will help you move further towards your goals, whether they're personal goals or business goals or whatever. That being said, it's not always obvious. I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that it's not always obvious what your values are. And if you're not sure, that's where you can start to look to your behaviors, look to your actions, look to how they make you feel. Did you miss that thing of your kids, but you felt really, really, really upset about it, right? That might be a sign that your actions are not aligned with your values. Now, the dictionary says that a value is a person's principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment of what is important in life, or the regard that something is held to deserve, the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. So I think we're going more for that first definition here.
Mm-hmm. That's so much more eloquent than what I came up with.
I think that both of our ways of looking at it, as well as the dictionary. We're pretty good. No, the dictionary isn't always the best definition in my perspective. So what are some other reasons why understanding your values matter as a business, through the lens of business?
Yeah, and that is a good point as a business, because as a business, your values don't need to be the same as your personal values.
They need to overlap, but
Yes.
your business's values, it's important to separate them somewhat, is what I'm hearing. Yeah.
So I know you mentioned like team culture and stuff. Definitely hiring and firing is one of the biggest places where we use our values.
If not the biggest, because that's what forces us to really like question it and go back over them again.
Yeah, I mean, hiring's kind of the easy one. And, you know, we say hiring, but if you're kind of a solopreneur who works with contractors, you can use this kind of same framework to choose contractors to work with. But when we hire internally, we actually kind of basically make a chart and say, you know, who, like, with all our values on kind of the vertical and all the potential candidates that we're considering on the horizontal. And we like check off like who fills out or who meets which criteria for the values and who like maybe does or doesn't. But what we found is when we find employees who meet a lot of our core values, they're the people that we love and we think are amazing, and we could never ever imagine our business without again. Because every single aspect of the business, like we're always in alignment. You know, okay, this is probably like the 5th episode in a row I've raved about Kevin, but you know, one of our values is simplify small changes, big result. Like Kevin's first week here, he like came to me. He's like, I've been looking through some of the processes and I found some places we can automate things and save time. Like the first time he was doing a task, he was already figuring out ways to make it better.
I want to kind of pause you there and unpack that a little bit, because we have had that particular thing, look at processes, identify ways to simplify them, identify, ways to automate things, et cetera. Like that has been on our list of kind of expectations for the job and required kind of like tasks and competencies. But I would say a major shift for us, even though that has also been on our list of core values, is looking at that not just in terms of kind of a task or a competency that's needed, but really as a value that we're looking for in someone. And what that means in practical terms is that instead of asking someone, have you done this before? Or is this something that interests you? Or is this something that you can do? You actually ask them a little bit more kind of tertiary questions that you've already done some thinking about how their answer to that question can show you that value. And what I mean by that is that if you ask a question, I'm not able to come up with one off the top of my head, but basically, if you ask, can you do this or will you do this? Everyone's going to say yes. But if this is something intrinsic about them and their personality, then they can't help but do it. And that's where we found the most success is kind of a 2-part process. One is tweaking our own values to make sure that they still really work for us, but that we are giving them nuance in a way that is meaningful to others as well, but also finding those people who overlap with them on an intrinsic basis. I think
I think actually the question we used in our admin hiring process was super simple. I mean, we asked a couple questions in different ways to kind of get at it, or it came out in different areas. But what we just straight up asked, like, tell us about a time that you made something more efficient or you improved something. And you can tell by the quality of their answers whether they're grasping at straws and just trying to think of something, or whether it's like really to the core of their being. There was someone who we didn't end up hiring just because we had a lot of great candidates, but she was working, doing some sort of like administrative work at a cancer agency. And she basically like came up with a way to completely revamp their system and digitize their records using technology instead of doing it by hand. And they like fired her because they're like, hey, we basically like, we want you to be hands. Like, we don't want you to come up with new ideas. And she said she was happy because she couldn't like sit there and let the same inefficient things happen over and over and like just not say anything.
Yeah. And I want to put like some of the important things out of that being that she was glad she was fired. Like to me, that of everything you just said, that's the thing that really says to me.
Because her core values didn't align with the company. So she wasn't happy.
Totally. So I hear that and I'm like, ooh, wince towards the company. But that company has different core values, right? Like that, they're different. They're not necessarily better or worse because we don't know their goals. We don't know their context. We don't know the people who run it, but we do know that, their loss is our gain in that circumstance because that is demonstrating a value that we really do care about. So Celene, what are some of the dangers if you do have people on your team? Some of the dangers, and I would say some of the symptoms, if you have people on your team who maybe are not aligned with your core values.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of those things where really, like, it can be kind of tricky to identify early on. I mean, we'll try and kind of figure out what are the early warning signs, but sometimes, like, it's not obvious until it's glaring you in the face. That's happened to us too, where it snowballs into this big issue, and then we look at it and we're like, oh, like, it's a core values issue. But early on, like, if there's ever something that an employee does, that's not necessarily even at like a high enough level to talk to them about it, or let alone like write them up or have some sort of disciplinary action, but they do something and you're kind of like, you make that like gasping noise. You're like, ooh, and you like sit back and think about it, and you're like,
or you're baffled, like, why would they do that? Yeah.
Like in the past when we've had VAs who've like made a mistake and purposely hidden it from us. That's demonstrating anti-accountability, something that's completely directly opposed to our one of our core values. I mean, I feel like that would probably be a red flag for most companies, but for us especially, that kind of pattern of behavior. And that was kind of where it got to a point where it was like a really big red flag. But finding those little things early on where you can kind of list them out and see like, oh, is this action in line or out of line with our core values?
Yeah, I find, just checking in with my own emotions where I'm finding myself confused or alarmed. I mean, being the leader of a business, there are many things that cause me alarm, even things that are relatively minor. But confusion for me is a really telltale sign because, for instance, in the situation that you're saying, I can understand why someone might hide it. But we had one situation where a person that we hired had to look into whether or not there was a certain feature on a platform that we were using. And I was quite adamant that it was a basic feature and that if it wasn't there, it was going to be a big problem. Now, I wasn't upset at her or at anyone in particular, nor would I say I was particularly upset, but I was just like, no, this is really important. We followed up with her like 3 or 4 times, and she kept saying she was kind of looking into it or etc. And actually, after we let her go, I looked back at, I happened to come across like a thread or something like that and realized that the feature simply wasn't available. And she had felt so, embarrassed or personally responsible for the fact that something that was such a basic feature wasn't available, that she had hidden it and was doing extra work to basically be the automation that we were looking for, but was not being very successful at it. And I was just baffled. Now, I was totally, totally baffled because it was like, why would she not tell us? That's nothing on her. She would not have gotten in trouble in any way, shape, or form. We could have supported her on a workaround that didn't rely on her. But once again, that's kind of a more extreme example, but that was directly contrary to being authentic. That was directly contrary to simplifying things. And that was directly contrary to accountability. But for me, again, that was a moment where everything became super clear. But if I looked back to, all of the things that had led up to that point, I realized that she had made a number of decisions that I had been confused about. Not even necessarily like super mad or disappointed, but simply confused. And I think that confusion comes from, when you yourself are, acting in ways that are aligned with the values of the business or your own values, it's difficult for it to be obvious sometimes why people would act against it. Like even the situation you just described with the applicant who tried to make things better at their other company, like my knee-jerk response to that but why? Why would they reject that? That seems silly. And And then I check myself and I'm like, right, they have different values and a different structure and possibly different goals for their organization. But I think that confusion is a sign that there is some sort of conflict between core values going on. So if you're feeling confusion over a new employee, that is not simply, what are they doing, but more, why did they do that? Or why did they do that like that? I would say that's perhaps a red flag.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So on the other hand, though, I think you've kind of hinted a little bit at some of the things that make core values really awesome when people are aligned, which is this feeling of synergy that you've described. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Oh my goodness. I'm feeling like the feels in my body just thinking about it. I mean, we've done this exercise before where we kind of list, our current team, list our values and check off like whether they check, like whether they meet that value, maybe kind of meet that value. Maybe we don't know whether or not they meet that value. They potentially could. They just haven't necessarily like demonstrated it or haven't had an opportunity to, or whether they like don't meet that value. Obviously, like I love our entire team so much, but the people that check off, like, and most of our team checks off most of our core values because that's how we hire. But the people who check off like every single one of them are really close. Like you're like, oh yeah, like I get so stoked to hop on calls with them, or like every day, like I'm amazed to work with them, or whatever it is. Like you don't really have that friction. Like even things like being self-aware and authentic, you can have honest conversations with them because they're also self-aware and authentic. Or, like symbiosis, care for yourself and others. Like, these are all things that our team excels at. But I always go the extra mile for my team to help them out if they're not feeling great or if they're having a rough day or something's going on. And I know like just as strongly if I'm not feeling good or if I'm having a rough day, they're going to come to me and be like, hey, what can I do to help you? Because that's, and these kind of values fuel that company culture too.
Yeah, I would even go so far as to say that in my personal life, the more I become aware of my values in my personal life, and actually in the last month or so, I've done an exercise, even though Anansi has had defined core values for many years, I actually did an exercise in my personal life. But even before that, I've known for a while now that like people that are in my inner circle of kind of friendship and connection need to have a certain level of self-awareness. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to accept somebody into my inner circle and then get mad at them for not being self-aware. Is that I've come to realize that, if somebody's working on themselves or growing or does something that like hurts me or that hurts themselves or hurts someone else, as long as, of course, it doesn't cross an abusive line, I can accept that as long as they are aware of where they're at and able to kind of communicate that, they're struggling or they're growing, or just being aware of where they're at and being aware, as you said, of their faults as well as their strengths. So this can be really powerful because once I realized that, it stops making the question, whether it's personal or business, so much whether is this person like a good friend or a bad friend or a good employee or a bad employee or etc. And it more becomes the question of, are they an appropriate employee for the business, or are they an appropriate person to have in my life right now? And I think that that's a way more powerful question, because someone who is a quote unquote good employee may not actually be the best to work with or the best for your company. And we've gotten tripped up on this before, where people had very valid reasons perhaps for why they were messing up, or they were good in certain strengths. But ultimately working with them was a struggle. It was a challenge, and the business worked better without them, and they probably feel better where they're at now. Hopefully, people who are with us who are not with us anymore, people who have been with us who aren't with us anymore, were able to find places that aligned more with their values. But we found, does it ever make a difference?
Yeah, and actually that's part of why, we talked about this in another episode, why we write such long job descriptions, because people can genuinely, if they're self-aware, they can look at that job description and feel connected to it, feel connected to our core values, and think like, hey, this is where I want to work. This would be a good place for me because what they're saying aligns with how I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I just want to back up a few minutes and just kind of give a nod to the people here who may not already have those core values totally defined, or who might be wondering, did these core values even work for me? Are they really my core values? So if somebody who's listening doesn't already have a set of defined core values, or if they want to refine or define them further, how would you go about coming up with them?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to kind of refer to the exercise and traction because I think that's probably pretty much how we originally came up with them. And, we tweak them over time. But in traction, they have a really good exercise, which basically goes something like this. You kind of like sit down with maybe pen and paper, maybe a Google Doc, whatever you prefer, in front of you. Close your eyes for a second and think about your favorite like top 1 to 3 employees or contractors. Who do you love working with? Who like gets you excited when you get to work with them? Make a big long list. Like just brainstorm all the things you love about them, like all their qualities. It might be like 5 qualities, 10 qualities, 15 qualities. Maybe there's like 100 things about them that you love and you can't say enough good things about them. Do maybe if you have 3 employees, write 10 qualities for each person. Which ones overlap or which ones, like circle the ones that are the most important to you and cross off the ones that are, the least important to you. You can kind of make that, that narrowed down list, narrow it down again, until you have about 3 to 5 values. And, you talk about this with other people, like be transparent, like share it with your team. Actually, this is an exercise you can do as a team where, without actually naming names, each person writes their favorite things about their favorite people to work with. You have this huge pool. I think, if you do it in person, you can kind of put it on pieces of paper and organize them around and like crumple up the ones that are less important and move the more important ones forward. But you basically kind of triage it. So you start with like a big list, you narrow it down, and then review them quarterly. I mean, for us, our values have changed over time as we've kind of honed in on what's really important to us, or maybe realized that something that wasn't, that was actually really important to us wasn't being reflected on the list, or wasn't like just even the wording just didn't quite resonate with us.
Yeah, and I can just step in with an example or two here, being accountability, much like when we're going through this exercise with clients and helping them kind of define their values and mission and vision and that kind of stuff that comes from values. We might push back if somebody says, oh, professionalism is a value. We are very professional. Professional basically means that you like take money to do it. I should hope that you're professional. That's one thing that a former mentor of mine would say is kind of a pay to play value. It's one of the things that you need to even show up. But accountability is something that accountability often is categorized there as well. Well, that's a basic business thing. If people want to work with someone else, they need to be accountable. But one of the things that we found is that we've changed this a few times in terms of what we call it, how we define it. And in the end, accountability is something that means something very specific to us that is extremely relevant, that has made or broken whether an employee is a good fit for us. And therefore, we stand by it, and it's important for us to have it on there, not because it's aspirational, but because it's a really good reminder and anchor to have it on there.
Yeah. And I mean, we, obviously we know this, but for people listening, like Say and I, we routinely every quarter, we challenge ourselves. We challenge each other on these core values. I'll be like, so, why is self-aware important? Is that still relevant? Like, has that resonated with us this quarter? The answer is yes. Or so far has been, but
yeah.
like
so
obviously far. As much as I resonate with all these values, they might not, they're not like necessarily set in stone forever. If something else comes up or we realize that what we have on the list isn't quite like saying or what we're trying to get it to say.
Yeah, that's also why some of ours have, more words after them. Like simplify is small changes for big results. And we are people who sometimes are challenged to be very, very complex. We like to add details and add stuff. But when we look at what's really successful for us and what really brings us the greatest like value and pleasure and all that kind of stuff, it really does come down to simplifying things as much as possible and creating simple, effective systems. But we acknowledge that we are complex thinkers and think in complex ways. So we've given that a little bit more definition with very specifically, we make as small a change as possible to create the biggest result that we can. That is a nuance of simplify. Likewise, symbiosis, caring for yourself and others, we used to define that as care for others and they will care for you. And we've shifted that to care for others who will care for you. And ultimately, we just simplified that to just care for yourself and others, with an understanding that there will be others who care for you. It's an abundance mindset type thing for us, which is really important. I will say too, the process of coming up with values and all of that is that if you have a big team, you may want to do this as a leadership exercise first. Or if you're not sure that the people on your team are aligned with your values, it can be really helpful to do this on your own, but especially I would say as a leadership exercise. If you have other people on your leadership team, either because you have other, C-level people, or whether you have a partner or many partners, or whether like Celene and I, you guys are just a super awesome leadership team together, definitely make sure that you are able to orient yourself on this before simply just opening it up to the masses, I would say, because if you have a larger team or a team that's really not aligned with your values, that your fear won't be aligned with your values, then starting out by opening this up to everyone can be very informative. But if it turns out that it's actually showing you that your company is going in a direction that's not aligned with your values, that you're not super keen on, then
that'd be awkward.
Yeah, that would be awkward. And also awkward then to basically tell people, oh, hey, well, see all these values that you came up with, but they're actually not aligned. So, you're going to have to make some hardcore decisions now about where to go with this. Just better to orient yourself a little bit, I would say.
And I mean, there's no universe in which you're going to magically have a team that exactly aligns with all your values. But if they pretty much align with the opposite of your values, that's when it can kind of become a problem.
Yeah.
Or if they really don't align with like one of the ones that's like the most central to the company.
Yes, that would be key, right? Like ours are in no particular order, but we have defined that self-awareness, both for me personally, but also specifically for hiring and firing, not necessarily quite as much with like clients and partners, but definitely for people who are on the team, that is non-negotiable, absolutely non-negotiable. We've had some big problems.
Yeah.
there.
Whereas maybe like simplify, if someone doesn't align with that, potentially like as it pertains to their role, it might not be super essential, or we can kind of help them come up with like workarounds or nudge them in different directions, or whatever it is. But if it's not something that's central to their role, it's not like we're going to fire someone for not being obsessed with simplifying things.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, Celene. But if I'm not mistaken, Traction, which I know we've mentioned it in several episodes, but Traction by Gino Wickman, highly recommend it as just giving you some ideas about how to structure and run the operations of your company more efficiently. They actually have kind of like a rating system. Like they say that, your employees need to have a certain amount of your values and a certain amount of them need to overlap there. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, but I don't really know the numbers off the top of my head. Maybe it's something we can include in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely be giving links to Traction, any Traction-related resources that are available for free online. Basically, not everybody needs to be a clone of each other. In fact, diversity breeds creativity and connection and awareness in lots of really positive and amazing ways. But they need to have a majority. There needs to be a majority overlap, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, if say you're working with like a contractor, someone that you don't interact with a lot, then it might be less of an issue, or it might be more of an issue. If, for example, if organization is one of your core values and one of your contractors is super, super, super sloppy or always late, or, their work's full of mistakes or whatever, obviously if any contractor was like that, it would probably be a deal breaker. But if there's certain things in the contractor that really don't align, that's where it can be an issue. But I would say that if it's more of a thing where they kind of like work remotely and then deliver something, then, core values aren't necessarily quite as strict. It depends on how intimately you're working with someone, like how much core values need to overlap is what I'm trying to say.
Totally. And I think this is like many business concepts where it is a tool for you to recognize patterns and think more critically. It's not an end all be all woohoo, you figure this out and everything will magically be like easy. Even some of the stuff that we're talking about, in terms of like hiring, how directly asking somebody, do you have this quality? And even directly asking them, tell us about times you have demonstrated this quality can be really good. But we found that we've had to like really get creative about some kind of workaround ways to ask people open-ended questions and just analyze their responses. There's still a lot of judgment calls, things like that.
Or even looking for them referencing these values in completely unrelated questions. Like I know, for example, radical wellness, if there's a candidate who's mentioning, that they take care of themselves or they like to, go for runs as a way to like decompress. Like we might have a question like, I think, for example, one question was like, if you're getting stuck on a task, like what do you do? And some people say they reach out for help, they Google it, whatever. One person said they like go for a run to clear their head and then they come back to the task later. And then they like started talking about like their journey with mental health in the same question, which like, I'm not making this up. This was true. I'm like, they checked the box on radical wellness. Because they're bringing it up where it's not even asked in the question because it's so important to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're also not saying, oh, yes, absolutely, I'm wonderful at this. It's all good, la, la, la. They're saying, this is something I think about and is important to me.
Yeah. And they're also, in this case, they're also demonstrating self-awareness because they started talking about, like their past when they would get frustrated really easily and shut down or whatever. Which, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but they demonstrated multiple levels of connecting with our core values on a question that wasn't related to it at all.
Absolutely. And I don't want to go too nerdy down a copy path here, but this is one of those things that that's so overused in the copy, just in the writing, not even copywriting, just in the writing world, which is show, don't tell, right? And what does that even mean? It means that look for examples of something being true rather than statements of something being true. Examples of something being true tell us a story that we can immediately relate to and engage with and dig into. Statements of something being true are not so engaging because anybody can state that something is true, right?
Sorry.
Oh, please continue.
I was going to say, it's just a really good example of this, completely unrelated to business that all popped in my head. But a few months ago, we were looking for new tenants for our suite. And, everyone says they're super clean on their application, obviously, because no landlord ever wants like a messy tenant. But the tenants that we ended up getting, who I absolutely love, like the first thing the woman says when she comes in is she says, what type of floors are these? They look like they'd be really easy to keep clean. And then proceeds to ask me about whether or not you can use vacuums on them, whether or not you can use wet mops on them, and like how to care for them. Before she even like sees the place, she's asking me about like floor care. So obviously she's probably a clean person, as it turns out she is. But it's one of those things you can look for. I mean, because they're showing you, they're not just like writing it on a list where you're like everyone says it.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to fake, It's even someone might be able to ask, like, oh, are there carpets or floors? I just, want to know for like cleaning purposes or whatever. It's another thing to be like asking a few questions that are kind of showing that this is something that is important to you and that you care about. And that's really what a value comes down to, something that is important to you and that you care about and think about a lot.
And demonstrating enthusiasm about it too.
Yes. Something you're enthusiastic about typically.
Like for most people, like they'd probably roll their eyes if someone said they're like enthusiastic about cleaning. But for really clean people, they like, or for me, like a lot of people can say they're data oriented or love numbers, but like I nerd out and get super stoked when I get to talk about numbers and data.
Yes, you do. And see, I value numbers and data as well in the sense that I find myself always asking myself, okay, what does the data say, et cetera? Now, I'm not as good at it, and I don't have as much of an aptitude for it, but it's still very important to me. It penetrates my thoughts. And the more I know about it, or the more I have people at my disposal who know about it, the more I, drive my decisions by it. And which leads to the question, are values something that is purely intrinsic, or are values something that can be learned or that can change over time? What are this is an open-ended question. I'm curious what your opinion is, Celene.
I feel like they can definitely be learned, especially, just taking, for example, self-awareness. I feel like all of us, as like, for example, maybe teenagers, are not self-aware at all. And some people, become a lot more self-aware as they grow, and some people don't, and some people somehow like become more self-deluded as they age. But it changes. It's not an intrinsic thing. It's something that, people either like put an effort towards or are influenced by people around them to become more self-aware.
It's true. I think I would agree with that. I think that there is some intrinsic element to it in the sense that it's very difficult to be like, okay, that's going to be my value now. Woohoo. And then you pursue it. And then 1 year later, that is your value. Like, I don't think it's so cut and dried. Like I said, look to your actions, right?
Yeah.
But I do agree that they're influenced by things all around us and reinforced, There some things kind of, again, getting into the real talk, like some people say you cannot have a value that's aspirational in any way, shape, or form, i.e. your values, and this is in a business context, need to be exactly what are demonstrated by your actions, no more, no less, basically. And I'm not sure if I totally agree with that because I think they are flexible, but I do think there has to be some existing overlap. Some people, I think, like to think of themselves as self-aware or desire to be more self-aware, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it really matters to them on a deep level, or that it will deeply matter to them in a big way. Like
I would say that a value can be aspirational if you're actively working towards it. For example, like, radical wellness is something that we really, truly, and deeply value, but we don't necessarily always follow. But, and this is, again, like something where, like you said, you can't just decide you're going to be this value and go ahead and do it. But you can build small habits to work towards becoming more, like that value. Because I used to be terrible with wellness. Like back in my pre-mom days, I'd like work 60-hour work weeks and just come home and crash and eat garbage because I was just always at work and stuff. And I didn't take care of myself. And then, when I become a mom and I'm not only being a role model, but I'm trying to balance taking care of a toddler with working, with keeping, running a household, all this stuff. Like I realized there's that level where you kind of burn out and crash, and you have to make it a priority and you have to build that habit, whether it be like, take a bath, like a relaxing, not for cleaning purposes, just take a bath for relaxing purposes once a week, or set a reverse alarm, like go to bed by 10 o'clock every night or whatever it is. Like you can build habits towards it. Even if you're not at the 100% stage right away, if you have it as a value and you're actively working towards it and making it a value in your business that you want others to follow by example, I think that's okay.
Yeah, I agree. I really like that as you are taking action towards it.
Don't just stick it on your value list and pretend it's your value.
Yeah, totally. Like ask yourself, and that, again, the real talk. So how do you do that, right?
Yeah.
So ask yourself questions a lot. Ask other people questions, specific questions. What have I done? And I encourage you to write this down. What have I done in the last week to move myself more towards the value of simplifying things or towards the value of radical wellness or self-care? Right? And what am I doing in the next week to achieve this? Ask other people if you can't remember, what have I done in the last week that you would identify as simplifying something or that you've noticed I've done for my own wellness, ask like a partner or a friend or a coworker. And listen to the answers and ask yourself, like I said, this is a two-parter. It's not just about your actions. It's also about tweaking and nuancing your values. We have had, radical wellness has cycled through a few different things, including work hard, play hard, something more like balanced work life or something like that. And ultimately, we were far more successful at holding ourselves accountable and taking action towards radical wellness than we were at even work hard, play hard. Because we're not like play hard implies a certain level of kind of like partying or escapism or something like that.
Like the 80s business executives doing cocaine.
Totally, which just isn't... It isn't us, right? And we tend to then work hard and never get around to playing hard. We just keep working hard.
Yeah.
So that radical wellness, which also comes with this idea with it, the radical wellness, which is that you are we are not trying to dumb down our intensity, right? That was originally the balanced work life kind of a thing. We realized that like our intensity is one of our strengths, and it's more about applying that intensity to wellness in whatever way we individually define that. That was as powerful as a realization as taking action on it. Because before we were struggling to take action, knowing that this was something that was important to us, but there was still a disconnect there. So the answer is not always just to put more pressure on yourself. Sometimes it is to adjust to the reality of what is, as opposed to the should of what you wish could be.
I feel like that's quote worthy. I'm going to get that printed on a mug.
Ooh, maybe we can put it on one of the graphics or something like that for the podcast.
Awesome.
No, not big enough. I don't know. But I think we've covered a lot of what we wanted to tackle today. But did you have any insights? You run the team here at Anansi, Celene. Did you have any insights on how to, just leverage, reinforce, or engage the other people on the team who are not the leadership, leadership team with this?
I think, a couple things you can do is, first of all, talk about it. Make it part of your buzzword culture to talk about your values. And because if you have these values that are set in a document, your quarterly planning document somewhere, whatever it is, nobody ever looks at it. It's not going to become part of your company. So some of the things we do are, we'll have quarterly planning exercises around it, and we'll talk about them regularly. I know one that we did that was really fun a couple quarters ago is everybody was assigned someone else in the team, and they had to talk about one value they noticed that person really exemplifies. Another thing, we had a segue for, our sales and marketing and some of our L10s last week. And I asked, what is one thing you've done in the past week for self-care? It's holding people to the standards and then recognizing when they are kind of doing actions that are in line with the core values.
Yeah, absolutely. We also challenge people, that same quarterly planning. We challenge people to share a value that they were struggling with a little bit more and potentially needed a little bit more support on. And much to our surprise from this exercise, we found we assigned people, we assigned people to other people. But we actually found that pretty much every core value was covered. We let them pick, which one does this person exemplify? Which one are you struggling with? Which one are you doing good at? I think we did kind of the compliment sandwich there, which one are you really rocking? Which one are you struggling with? And what is one that someone else is rocking, in that order? And we actually covered almost every value just organically. And that was really cool. That was really reinforcing for us. I mean, we have been defining and redefining our core values for years now. And this was just a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago. And it was really, really affirming to see just how much they were resonating with people. But it was also really, really powerful, I think, for people to engage more directly with the values. I've done a lot of kind of speeches or talks or et cetera to kind of share them with everybody. But no surprise to me, but there wasn't half as powerful as other people sharing them with me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of the thing, right? Nobody wants their boss to come up to them and be like, hey, so here's 5 things that you need to suddenly be. I'm just putting this on you and I'm expecting you to be this. These are our values. This is you. People are just going to roll their eyes and walk away, right? They need to, and I mean, we hire people who already connect with these values, so it makes it easier. But, we want people to take these values as their own, not in their lives, but in their business, and care about them.
Yeah, and I will say, I don't think I've mentioned, I might have mentioned this during one of our hiring podcasts episodes, but I actually, as part of our more recent job ad, we actually linked to one of my core value speeches, that actually, the one I'm very, very proud of, that kind of lays out and defines a lot of the why of why we do what we do, how we define marketing, what each of our core values means. And that's something that I'm sure there are people who just, skip to the bottom of the page and press apply or whatever, but they probably don't get very far in the application. But people who are interested, if I'm applying for a job, you bet your butt that I would click on that and read through it and, see if it's stuff that I self-identify with. And even if it was stuff where I was like, okay, yeah, cool, that's great, keep going. But there have definitely been companies where I've read through their site or their values or something and been like, hot diggity damn, I need to freaking work for these people. I need to work for these people. And that's really powerful. If you have people who are entering your organization already enthusiastic about you, the work you do, and the why that you do it, those people are going to work harder and be those enthusiastic raving fans within your business as well. Assuming, of course, that that's authentic, that what they are reading and connecting to is authentic.
Yes, and that's actually another kind of place that we've centered this a lot about hiring and internal team structure, but where you can really let your core values shine is on your website for your customers, because it's that same thing. If you have like a potential client or a potential customer who lands on your website or your if you're doing web design on one of your clients' websites and they connect with those values, they're going to become powerful advocates of your company. I mean, assuming that your company also like demonstrates the values and doesn't just list them. But it's important to not just share it with your team, but share it externally as well.
Yes. And sharing it, being clear, I would say being clear on your values and working them into your language and your messaging, both, as a company in your marketing materials and just internally and in the kind of common language that you just use while talking. That gives the people who work with you and share those values a language that they themselves can use to communicate to other people why you're fantastic. Right? Like voice and tone, especially voice, are something that we talk about quite a bit that are really, really important in terms of conveying the secondary characteristics of your business in the sense of not just the literal services that you offer, but the why, your brand, your approach, all of those things. But voice and tone are slippery things that it takes a professional a lot of the time to really implement consistently well. Values are something that are simple. They are easy to absorb. If they are accurately and authentically defined, they are typically words that other people can take and communicate to other people. Even more recently, I was having, just some concerns around someone that we'd worked with in the past who'd been kind of a mentor to us, and just had felt a little bit betrayed because I realized that they had taken some actions that I didn't believe were in line with their values. And I went back to their values and read them over and was like, okay, their values overlap a lot with mine, but I actually see that the thing that I myself was valuing here is not a stated value of theirs. And will that affect, our future relationship with them or something like that? Probably. But I didn't lose as much kind of like trust, or I didn't feel quite so betrayed when I could see that even though they were operating on values different from mine, they weren't necessarily betraying their own, which is, I think, a much bigger and darker experience. Yeah.
And that's, one kind of tip as well. If you are sharing values on your website, I know we talked about showing, not telling earlier in terms of like interviewing, but show, not tell when you list. Don't just be like, okay, these are my values, or these are
these 5 words, these 3 to 5 words, or these 3 to 5 short sentences. If you can, give examples.
Yeah. Show how you actually fulfill these, and you'll gain so much more trust and respect.
Yes, or reference them on other pages than just, here's the list. It can be really useful having those somewhere, but if you can reference them throughout your copy, intersperse them again throughout your language, make them a core part of who you are, not just something you pay lip service to from time to time, that's where the power is.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, we've covered a lot here. Just kind of a quick recap of some of the things that we've covered. So we've covered, what is a core value? What are some of the things that make it important? Why does it matter? What are some of the dangers of not having a team aligned with your core values versus some of the advantages, right? Some of those dangers being a sense of frustration or lack of flow, even if someone has technical skills. And some of the advantages being just synchronicity in the best way between brains and hearts and creative minds. And that's pretty awesome. We've talked about, how to define some of your core values, right? Listing out some of your favorite employees that you wish you could clone, identifying what you like about them. Also identifying that even if you don't have employees or a team is not part of your particular, business journey, that this is something that you can do with your contractors, even something that you can do with your clients and partners. Especially as a solopreneur, you tend to be more directly enmeshed with your clients. And we talked a little bit about how to engage people internally, how to apply values through the hiring process. Did I miss anything in terms of kind of key takeaways or things that we pulled from this session?
Well, I mean, honestly, probably, because we covered a lot, but I think you got the big ones.
Awesome. So now we want to hear from you. We want to know, what are your core values? Did they surprise you? Have they changed over time? Have you had frustrations or issues with people, whether that's, clients or people internally on your team who maybe were good or possibly laughably bad and really did or did not align with your values? Let us know. Send us a comment, but especially send us an email. We are very, very interested. You can get in touch with us, say at anansicontent.com. That's SAY at ANAN as in Nancy, CONTENT.com. And of course, always, if you do want to, subscribe, like, comment on your platform of choice, we definitely want to hear where you're at and what your perspectives are and where this has worked for you, whether this has been helpful for you. Lots of fun stuff there. Awesome. Well, hopefully you guys have gotten a lot of value out of today's episode. Definitely, we would love to hear from you. And we will be back next week with more awesome interviews and digging deeper into the exciting world of running an agency and the exciting world of moving towards more of a leader instead of constantly being a firefighter. So thanks, guys, for tuning in. I hope you guys have an absolutely awesome week.
And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always, always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.